Are you the new person drawn toward me? To begin with, take warning. I am surely far different than what you suppose. Do you suppose you will find in me your ideal? Do you think it's so easy to have me become your lover? Do you think the friendship of me would be unalloyed satisfaction? Do you think I am trusty and faithful? Do you see no further than this facade, this smooth and tolerant manner of me? Do you suppose yourself advancing on real ground towards a real heroic man? Have you no thought, oh dreamer, that it may all be Maya, illusion? Passing stranger, you do not know how longingly I look upon you. You must be he I was seeking, or she I was seeking. It comes to me as of a dream. I have somewhere surely lived a life of joy with you. All is recalled as we flit by each other, fluid, affectionate, chaste, matured. You grew up with me, were a boy with me, or a girl with me. Your body is no more your body alone, nor has it left my body, mine alone. You give of me of your eyes, face, flesh as you pass. You take of my beard, breast, brawn in return. I'm not to speak to you. I am to think of you while I sit alone, and when I wake at night alone. I am to wait. I do not doubt that I am to meet you again. I am to see to it that I do not lose you. We two boys together clinging, one the other never leaving, up and down the roads going, north and south excursions making, elbows stretching, power enjoying, fingers curling, armed and fearless, eating, sleeping, drinking, loving, no law less than ourselves owning, sailing, soldiering, thieving, threatening, misers, menials, priests alarming, air-breathing, water-drinking, on the turf or sea beach dancing, cities wrenching, ease scorning, statutes mocking, feebleness chasing, fulfilling our foray. I think I could turn and live with animals. They are so placid and self-contained. I stand and look at them long and long. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. They do not make me sick discussing their duty to God. Not one is dissatisfied. Not one is demented with the mania of owning things. Not one kneels to one other, nor to any of its kind that lived 1,000 years ago. Not one is respectable or unhappy over the whole world. The pure contralto sings in the organ loft. The carpenter dresses his plank. The tongue of his foreplane whistles its wild ascending lisp. The married and unmarried children ride home to their Thanksgiving dinner. The pilot seizes the kingpin and drives home with a heavy arm. The mate stands braced in a whaleboat. Lance and harpoon are ready. The duck hunter walks by, silent and curious stretches. The deacons are ordained at the altar with crossed hands. The spinning girl retreats and advances to the sound of the big wheel, rolling, rolling, rolling on the river. The farmer stops at the bars while he walks on a first day loaf and looks at the oats and the rye. The lunatic is carried at last to the asylum. A confirmed case. He will never sleep anymore as he did in a cot in his mother's bedroom. The juror printer with gray head and gaunt jaw works his case. He turns his quid of tobacco as his eyes blur with the manuscript. The malformed limbs are tied to the surgeon's table. What is removed drops horribly pale. The quadroon girl is sold at the auction stand. The drunkard nods over the barroom stove. The machinist rolls up his sleeves. The policeman travels his beat. The gatekeeper marks who passed. Oh, the young fellow drives the express wagon. I love him, though I do not know him. The half-breed straps on his light boots to compete in the race. The western turkey shoot draws old and young. Some lean on their rifles, some sit on logs. Out of the crowd steps the marksman, steadies his position, levels his piece. The group of newly arrived immigrants cover the wharf and the levee. As the woolly pates hoe in the sugar fields, the overseer views them from his horse. The bugle calls in the ballroom. The gentlemen run to their partners. The dancers bow to each other. The young man lies awake in the cedar-roofed garret and harks to the musical rain. The wolverine sets traps on the creeks that help fill the Huron. The squaw, in her yellow-hemmed cloths, is offering moccasins and bead bags for sale. The connoisseur peers down the exhibition gallery, his eyes half closed and bent sideways. As the deckhands make fast the steamboat, a plank is lowered for the shore-going passengers. The younger sister holds out the skein. As the older sister winds it up into a ball, she watches now and then for knots. The new wife is happy and contented, having just this week born her first child. The clean-haired Yankee girl works at her sewing machine, or in the mill, or in the factory. The paving man leans on his double-handed rammer. The reporter's lead flies over the notebook. The shoemaker waxes his thread. The conductor keeps time for the band, and all the players follow him. The child is baptized. The convert is making his first professions. The regatta is spread out on the bay. The race has begun. How the white sails sparkle. The drover, watching his drove, calls out to them that would stray. Yippee-oh-tie, get along, little doggies. The peddler sweats with his pack on his back. The purchaser higgling about the odd cent. The bride unrumples her white dress. The minute hand of the clock moves slowly. The opium eater reclines with fixed head and pursed lips. The prostitute draggles her shawl. Her bonnet bobs on her tipsy and pimpled neck. The crowd laugh at her blackguard oaths. The men jeer and wink to each other. Miserable! I do not laugh at your oaths nor jeer you. Walt Whitman! Call me corn-faced, will you? You old shabbaroon, loblolly, loose-cocker! The president, holding a cabinet council, is surrounded by the great secretaries. On the piazza walk three matrons, stately and friendly with twined arms. The crew of the fish smack pack repeated layers of halibut in the hold. The Missourian crosses the plains, toting his wares and his cattle. As he goes about the train, the fare collector makes notice by the jingling of loose change. The floor layers are flaying the floor, the tinners are tinning the roof. The masons are calling for mortar. Shanahan! Will you bring up the bucket of mortar, you loblolly lackadaisical devil, you! In single file, each shouldering his hod, pass onward the laborers, seasons pursuing each other. The indescribable crowd is gathered. It is the 4th of 7th month. Such salutes of cannon and small arms. Seasons pursuing each other. The plower plows, the mower mows, and the winter grain falls in the ground. Off on the lakes, the pike fisher watches and waits by a hole in the frozen surface. The stumps stand thick around a clearing. The squatter dries deep with his axe. The flatboatmen make fast towards dusk near the cottonwood or pecan trees. The coon hunters go through the region of the Red River and of those drained by the Tennessee and those of the Arkansas. Torches shine on the dark that hangs over the Chattahoochee and the Altamaha. Patriarchs sit at supper with sons and grandsons and great-grandsons around them. In walls of adobe and canvas tents rest trappers and hunters after their day's sport. The city sleeps, and the country sleeps. The living sleep for their time, and the dead sleep for their time. The old husband sleeps by his wife, and the young husband sleeps by his wife. And all these tend inward toward me, and I tend outward toward them. And such as it is to be of these, more or less, I am. And of these, one and all, I weave the song of myself. I celebrate myself and sing myself. And what I assume, you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed of this soil, this air, born here, of parents born here the same, of parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health, begin hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a little, sufficed what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for bad and for good. I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check, with original energy. Walt Whitman, a cosmos. Of Manhattan, the sun. Turbulent, fleshy, sensual. No sentimentalist. No stander above men and women, nor apart from them. No more modest than immodest. Unscrew the locks from the doors. Unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Whoever degrades another degrades me. And whatever is done or said returns at last to me. Through me, the afflatus surging and surging. Through me, the current and index. I speak the password, primeval. I give the sign of democracy. By God, I shall not accept anything that anyone can have their counterpart of on the same terms. Through me, mad, long, dumb voices. Through me, the interminable generations of prisoners and slaves. Voices of the diseased and the despairing, of thieves and dwarves. Voices of the cycles of preparation and accretion, of the threads that connect the stars, of wounds, of the father stuff, and of the rights of those the others are down upon. The deformed, trivial, flat, foolish, despised. Fog in air. Beetles rolling balls of dung. Through me, forbidden voices. Voices of sexes and lusts. Voices veiled, and I remove the veil. Voices indecent, clarified and transfigured by me. I do not press my fingers across my mouth. I keep as delicate around the bowels as around the head and heart. I keep as delicate around the bowels as around the head and the heart. Divine, divine I am, and I make holy whatever I touch. The scent of these armpits, aroma, finer than prayer, and this head more than churches, Bibles, and creeds. If I worship one thing more than another, it is the spread of my own body, or any part of it. Translucent mold of me, it shall be you. Shaded ledges and rests, it shall be you. Firm, masculine coulter, it shall be you. Whatever goes to the tilth of me, it shall be you. You, my rich blood, your milky stream, pale strippings of my life. Breast that presses against other breasts, it shall be you. My brain, it shall be your occult convolutions. Root of washed sweet flag, timorous pond snipe, nest of guarded delicate eggs. It shall be you. Mixed, tousled hay of head, beard brawn, it shall be you. Trickling of sap of maple, fiber of manly wheat, it shall be you. Sun so generous, it shall be you. Vapors shading and lighting my face, it shall be you. Brooks with sweaty dew, it shall be you. Wind whose genitals tickle against my, rub against me, it shall be you. Broad muscular fields, branches of live oak, loving lounger on my winding paths, it shall be you. Hands I have touched, face I have kissed, mortal I have ever loved, it shall be you. O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh, heart, 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 oh, the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold and dead. Oh, Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up. For you the flag is flung. For you the bugle trills. For you bouquets and ribboned wreaths. For you, the shores are crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, Captain, dear Father, my arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse, nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells. But I with mournful tread walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. heard at the close of the day how my name had been received with plaudits in the capital. Still, it was not a happy night for me, the thought of it. And else, when I caroused, or when my plans were accomplished, still, I was not happy. But the day I rose at dawn from a bed of perfect health, refreshed, singing, inhaling the ripe breath of autumn, when I saw the full moon in the west grow pale and disappear in the morning light, when I wandered over the beach and undressing bathed, laughing in the cool waters, and saw the sunrise, and when I heard that my dear friend, my lover, was that day coming, then I was happy. Then each breath tasted sweeter, and all that day my food nourished me more, and the perfect day passed well. And the next day came with perfect health, and with the next day at evening came my friend. That night, in the stillness, I heard the waters roll slowly and continually up the shore. I heard the hissing rustle of the liquid in sands as directed to me, whispering congratulations to me, for the one I loved the most lay sleeping by me under the same cover in the cool night. In the stillness, in the autumn moonbeams, his face was inclined toward me, and his arm lay around my breast. And that night, I was happy. Well, you've all been a wonderfully attentive audience to a 200-year-old man. I'd like to close with a poem that's the last part of my Song of Myself, which some of your scholars overrate. They think it's better than anything by far I ever wrote. I can't agree with them, but it's not a bad piece of writing. This is a valediction, a saying goodbye. And this character, Mr. Daley, whose body I am temporarily inhabiting, wishes me to dedicate it to, in memory of his brother Bill. The spotted hawk swoops by and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I, too, am not a bit tamed. I, too, am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. The last scud of day holds back from me. It flings my likeness after the rest, as true as any on the shadowed wilds. It coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart in air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun. I effuse my flesh in eddies and drifted in lacy jags. I bequeath myself to the dirt, to grow again as the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you, nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere, waiting for you. Thank you. All right, now the lecture begins. This will be painlessly brief. First of all, thank you all for coming. I know some of you will have to leave before this is all over. I hope to be done by 8, but you never know with windbags like me. So what I'm going to do is talk very briefly about Whitman and his poetry, and then open it up to discussion. I'm very interested in hearing what interests as many of you as we can talk to about Walt Whitman for you. So, first of all, let me just say a couple thanks, though, first. First to Krista from the library and Christine for organizing this and putting this together. Krista's in the back there. And the maintenance staff who brought all these extra chairs out on very short notice. Thanks to Julie Manugian and the staff of LexMedia. Julie is in the control booth. Filming this, it will be on Lexington cable, LexMedia's cable station, and also, to me, very exciting, YouTube. So if I get 1 million hits, I'll start getting a penny for every. That's never happening. But anyway, some of you who are Walt Whitman scholars may have noticed that I flubbed a few lines. My apologies, but hopefully, in the interests of performance, I wasn't going to stop and rewind. So I worked for many years as a machinist in a factory in Brighton, and I used to be able to listen to books on tape because nobody knew what I was doing. They thought I was weird that I wore any ear protectors at all or masks. They used to laugh at me for that. So they just thought I was doing some weird thing with ear protection. So I listened to hundreds of books on tape. And one of them was all of Leaves of Grass, every little jog and tittle of it. And I'm telling you, that is one boring book. Full of bombast and these long catalogs that have absolutely no redeeming factor whatsoever. But I was always interested in Whitman as a poet who was, for example, talking about things that a lot of people didn't talk about, particularly in the 19th century. The body, for example. Manly love that he called adhesiveness, which I really think was homoerotic, but there's lots of debates. I mean, there are scholars who've written whole biographies of him without even mentioning his homoerotic tendencies. Then there are people on the other side who want to attribute every single word he said to some kind of gay code, which I don't go with either. There are exquisite moments in a lot of the poems, particularly in Song of Myself. For one, in which the bombast, so bombast means literally a mouthful of cotton. That's what bombast is. So the bombast in Song of Myself spun itself into the twine. Oh goodness, I'm getting carried away with my poetic metaphors here. Spun itself into the twine of gentle exhortations, affectionate importuning, and wistful maneuvers. Yes, there was invective, but much of it had a sly jangle to it, a refreshing irreverence, a piston-pushing petulance. How's that for alliteration, my writing students? And excoriating bravado. Here was a poet who seemed cowed by nothing, whose brazen embrace of the body still felt shocking, even in a world saturated with misadventures in the skin trade. Few poets since Walt Whitman could get away with a formula as charming and ridiculously explicit as, and this is the way it should have been, wind whose soft tickling genitals rub against me. Now, even the most ridiculous pornographers could not beat that. Walt Whitman was born 200 years ago, and he survives, no, thrives, at once quaint and terribly modern. today, his democratic, quote-unquote, democratic project for these United States seems even more of a super sensible soap bubble now than it might have in his day. And it was a bit of a fraud anyway. Though he abhorred slavery and sympathized with the plight of the slaves, he supported the Fugitive Slave Act. That's the one where the southern slave owners were allowed to come north and retrieve the slaves who had left. There was a very famous fight in Boston where the radical abolitionists broke open into a jail and freed a slave. But he supported that Fugitive Slave Act and considered slavery enshrined in the Constitution, the seminal founding document of the nation he loved above any other institution. He opposed unions, was contemptuous of immigrants, and in later life suggested to his interviewer Horace Traubel, the N-word, like the Injun, will be eliminated. It is the law of history, races, whatnot, always so far inexorable, always to be. Someone proves that a superior grade of rats comes, and then all the minor rats are cleared out. So, I can't really think of Whitman as my hero, but I do admire his writing. I mean, let's face it, if we judged writers on their moral conduct and the thoughts, their private thoughts, we wouldn't read many people. Sylvia Plath, for example, wrote a lot of anti-Semitic screeds in her diaries. And yet, some leading African-American poets, I think Lucille Clifton is one, have revered him for his respectful portraitures of black figures in his poetry, especially here. Now, this portrait by a white man would be quite unusual in the 19th century. This is from section 13 of Song of Myself. The Negro holds firmly over the reins of his 4 horses. The block swags underneath on its tied-over chain. The Negro that drives the long dray of the stone yard. Steady and tall, he stands poised on one leg on the string piece. His blue shirt exposes his ample neck and breast and loosens over his hip band. His glance is calm and commanding. He tosses the slouch of his hat away from his forehead. The sun falls on his crispy hair and mustache, falls on the black of his polished and perfect limbs. I behold the picturesque giant and love him. This was not something that white writers were writing in the 19th century and way into the 20th century, or maybe even now. So Whitman's poetry is a little hard to unpack. I mean, most of it is free verse, but it has a kind of cadence, and the cadence that he's writing in is taken from the King James version of what Christians call the Bible, which is some very beautiful writing, even though it's quite inaccurate. For example, the Joseph's coat of many colors, the original Hebrew or whatever it was the coat of long sleeves. So Joseph's amazing Technicolor coat of long sleeves would be the play, I guess, in that case. He had a tremendous influence on later American poetry. The Beats were very influenced by him, Walt Whitman, Allen Ginsberg in particular. But I want to read something. Could I borrow I forgot to keep one of these. So, D.H. Lawrence wrote a wonderful book about American literature, and in it he has a chapter on Whitman. And he says a lot of not very nice things about Whitman, but he does say Whitman was a tremendous influence on him, and he admired him terribly. And he, like Whitman, had a lot of racist things to say about people, but that's a whole other question. Whitman, says D.H. Lawrence, in his not always very flattering assessment of the poet, was the, quote, first to smash the old moral conception that the soul of man is something, quote, superior, unquote, and, quote, above, unquote, the flesh. Whitman was the first heroic seer to seize the soul by the scruff of her neck and plant her down among the potsherds. So while I'm talking about this, I'm going to do an advertisement for a class I'm teaching in September and October on. It's called My Old Delicious Burdens. Well, that's a line, part of the line from Song of the Open Road. Still here I carry my old delicious burdens, which I think is a great thing to send somebody on their 80th birthday. Anyway, the class is going to be held at the Lexington Community Center. It's from 10 to 12 on Fridays. It starts on September 20th and runs through October 11th. Those of you who have taken the class know that we have a tremendous amount of fun, and I don't work you too hard. So I will be doing a similar performance, probably with some variation during part of the last class. If you want any more information about it, see me afterwards. I'll give this back to you. Thank you. All right, now I will open the floor to discussion, and I will yank people out of their seats to speak if nobody is forthcoming. Yes. Oh, you got. Krista has a mic, so she's going to give it to you. So, tell me, somebody volunteer. I will call on you if you don't. Why did you come to this talk performance tonight? Pam, you didn't know anything about Walt Whitman, did you? Or very little. Pam is a fabulous writer from Ireland. So did you know anything about, you've heard of him, I guess?
Yes, I had.
What had you heard?
I hadn't heard good things. I had heard that he was hard to understand, a little bit intellectual, blah, blah, blah. And I really felt that if I was going to expose myself to Walter Whitman, it would be through you.
Okay, you know what Emily Dickinson said when Thomas Wentworth Higginson asked if she'd read Walt Whitman? She said, "Oh, I heard he was disgraceful." But I'm hoping she kept copies, like snuck under her.
And so I've decided that I need to go back and read some more Walter Whitman.
Well, that's good. Call him Walt. Don't call him Walter. That was his father's name. He didn't want to be known as Walter. All right, Bob. This is a print that Bob Evans is a wonderful artist. And painter. He gave me this. This is an engraving from a photograph by Whitman by a man named Samuel Hollier. And I wrote a poem called "Engraving of Whitman" by Samuel Hollier, which you can find online. I don't have it in my head. But anyway, Bob, what's your connection? You were talking about using Whitman in your class on publication?
Yeah. Walt Whitman was a bookmaker. All of his books, he controlled everything about, including the image that Tom picked up. So that's what got me involved with Whitman, but also the fact I remember even in high school when, there's 3 poems by Whitman in everybody's anthology, and I remember reading those. And at the same time I was doing that, I was also very much involved on a project of my own of reading Thomas Wolfe.
Oh.
And if you read Thomas Wolfe and then you read Walt Whitman, they tend to write sequences that sound very much the same as what Tom did tonight.
Oh, interesting. The marvelous hills were blooming in the dusk. We shall not come back again. We shall never come back again. Oh, lost and by the wind grieved ghost, come back again.
So if you haven't read Thomas Wolfe for his poetry, you should try it.
All right. Margaret, why are you here? What are you here for?
Oh, that's easy. I'm not going to miss anything you do, Tom.
Oh, never mind me. Talk about Walt Whitman. This is about Walt Whitman, not Tom Daley.
Well, I have to say, I've never really much appreciated Walt Whitman, but I certainly didn't really appreciate Emily Dickinson until I took your course on her. And now I feel very familiar with her. So you may see me down at the community center.
How much did older, wiser, lifelong learners pay you? Are you a plant?
I'm a plant.
Okay. Margaret has taken about 13 courses with me through Lexington Community Education.
Including Gerard Manley Hopkins.
Yeah.
Don't get me going.
All right, who else? I won't call anybody else unless you all are being shy. Who else? Who's got a special interest? Who's read a lot of Whitman before? Any of you? Any of you Whitman aficionados? Not a one. Oh, here we go.
No, I just want to ask, to me he always seemed like a randy transcendentalist.
A randy transcendentalist. Well, he
agree with
certainly
that.
was.
And I'm very upset now that you told me about his slavery stance, and I wondered, how did he get on with Emerson and Thoreau, and did he know them?
Yeah, he knew them. Emerson was a little. Emerson wrote a letter to him. He sent him a copy of Leaves of Grass, the first edition in 1855, and Emerson thought this was exactly what he was looking for. He had predicted and hoped for the emergence of an American poet in the American grain who would write about America and not recycle the tropes and the legends and the stories of European culture. So he was very excited by it. He was a little peeved when Whitman, without his permission, took this letter and reproduced it on the next edition of Leaves of Grass. And he also complained about his catalogs. I mean, Whitman does have these really boring catalogs. They were not, so transcendentalism is probably, Whitman was certainly influenced tremendously by the transcendentalists, but he had a very different kind of, the thing about the body, that wasn't something that transcendentalists
That's why I said random.
Yeah,
There's the oversold part and then
he didn't really believe in immortality. He didn't believe in transcending. He said, this is the world. This is, this. He didn't believe, like Emily Dickinson, this world is not conclusion, a sequel stands beyond. He would not have said that. That poem about, he believed in the dissolution of matter and its continuation in different forms, and he was very excited, for example, by the notion of compost. He actually has a whole poem on compost. No, he noted how smelly things are when they decay, when they rot, when they ferment, but how they kind of end up clean. They come out as, grass that's coming out of graves is, sweet and clean, right? So the way that nature sort of reorganizes, recycles, reimagines matter was that was something very interesting and important to him. He saw himself as he wanted to be what the transcendentalists wanted to be. He wanted to sort of take people away from religion and, infuse them with his thinking. He saw himself as writing the American Bible, but it didn't take on. He had some cult followers. There was a woman who moved from England who was so entranced with his writings that she threw himself at her, and he wasn't interested in women, so it was a bit of a problem. Anyway.
Did he earn a living?
Did he earn a living? Well, he had many jobs. He couldn't hold jobs very long. He was a carpenter. He built several houses for his family. He worked as a printer. His brother was wounded in the Civil War, and so he went to find him, and he went to some of the camps where some of the prison camps, because his brother was captured for a while. He somehow got himself to a Confederate prison camp. I think that's what happened. But anyway, he spent a lot of time in the hospitals in and around Washington tending to the sick. But during that time, he had sort of clerk jobs in Washington. And then after that, I think he mostly lived on the generosity of patrons and the occasional sale of, he'd sell a couple hundred books or 1,000. He became very well known. Major figures in British literature were fascinated by him, and later the French were as well. So Oscar Wilde came and they wanted him to say that he was gay. They wanted him to come out, and he refused. John Addington Symonds said, well, isn't all this stuff about manly love, isn't this homoerotic? I beg your pardon, I have sired 7 children from 7 different women. It's just nonsense. Yes, Julie?
I have a question. So I'm here because I work at LexMedia and I'm filming. But I also have a question. I'm born and raised in Philadelphia, and in downtown Philadelphia we have a magnificent bridge that takes you from Philadelphia to South Jersey, and it's called the Walt Whitman Bridge.
Right.
And I never knew why. Can you tell me why Philadelphia is so attached to Walt Whitman?
Well, Walt Whitman and Betsy Ross had an affair. it didn't go very well. You know, they thought that, you know, like, well, Walt Whitman, Betsy Ross, Bridge entering Philadelphia, Walt Whitman entering Betsy. No. So his brother, after he had a partial stroke, and after that, his brother took him in or invited him to come live with him. His brother was living in Camden, New Jersey, which is right across the river from, or the Delaware. What is it, the bay there at that point? Is that the bay or the Delaware River?
The Delaware River.
Okay. So it's right across the river from there. So he had a series of houses in Camden. That's why he settled there. He had been he grew up in Long Island, then Brooklyn, then he lived in Manhattan, then he was in Washington, D.C. for a while. And I don't know where he was between Washington and Camden, but he spent most of the last, say, 30 years of his life, 25 years of his life in Camden. Yeah. But, you know, he understood the great cultural attributes of Philadelphia. Well, it's a center of culture, and he knew a lot of the leading literary figures. They didn't all like him very much. I mean, he wasn't so easy. He was easy to get along with if you were a handsome young man and he was interested in, you know, becoming your friend. But he could be obstreperous, and he had a pretty big ego. I'm not sure I would have liked him. But anyway, anybody else got any? Yes.
So I lived in Brooklyn Heights for about 5 years, and I'd walk by the very building in which he wrote Leaves of Grass.
Oh.
At that point, Brooklyn, the neighborhood, parts of Brooklyn Heights were being developed. Robert Moses had a hand in this, and they ripped off that house, Mid-Orr Street. They just destroyed it, and all sorts of influential people lived in Brooklyn Heights. Norman Mailer got together a group. I was there, a whole bunch of people, to at least put a statue up or a plaque. He was the most important American poet, or certainly one of them.
Yeah.
Put some memorial plaque or a statue. Nothing. Nothing at all. And they named those streets, that whole area, Cadman Plaza, after some terrible politician. And they put up statues to people like that. But here's Walt Whitman. He got no recognition at all. He wrote Brook Crossing, Brooklyn Ferry. He wrote quite a bit about Brooklyn himself.
Yeah.
Nothing in all of Brooklyn. Sad.
Yeah. Crystal. So that's interesting, because there's actually a petition drive to preserve a house in, I think it's somewhere in, I think it's Brooklyn. It might be the Bronx, somewhere outside of Manhattan, where he lived for a couple of years.
Brooklyn. He wouldn't go to Brooklyn.
He was all over Brooklyn. He lived in about 7 different houses there. So there's some, and the people who are developing the property are like not interested. They're no way. They're not gonna preserve this house. It's a shame. But not everybody loves Walt Whitman. Yes.
One more question. You know, the very famous poem, "Oh Captain, My Captain," which
Yes.
you read beautifully. Did that make any waves in this country when it was published? Did people understand, and did they get involved in thinking about Lincoln even in a different way after reading that?
Well, he wrote a whole series of poems after Lincoln's death. So there's
About Lincoln and the death?
When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Bloomed is an elegy to Lincoln, and he has a whole book of memories called Memories of President
And
Lincoln.
did people accept
Well,
that?
Whitman didn't need to be. So after Lincoln died, there was a very ferocious effort, particularly by the radical Republicans, to turn Lincoln into a demigod and to really stick it to the Confederacy, which is fine with me. I mean, anybody who sticks it to the Confederacy and the slave owners is fine with me. But they pumped Lincoln up into this sort of superhuman person. And Whitman's poetry was part of that whole thing. But I don't think that those poems in and of themselves had. Now, what they have done is they've lasted longer than that sort of cult worship has lasted in American culture. So I read and probably memorized, I don't remember memorizing, but I certainly read that poem when I was in school. I don't know if anybody reads it now. But does everybody remember, "Oh Captain, My Captain," reading that in school? Yeah. So, it's one of his few poems in rhyme, and one of his few poems that has those kind of, cadence. He really didn't like rhyme very much. But That's an interesting question. I don't think that in the period when he was alive it made a whole big dent in terms of popular consciousness about Whitman, but after he died and after the cult had there were lots of popular things about Whitman. We think of them as the only ones because those are the only ones, he's the only one we read. But, lots of people, Will Sandberg wrote a whole biography, like 4-volume biography of Lincoln, which was, by the way, how my mother figured out that my father was a dolt. Because she said, I gave him the biography by Carl Sandburg of Lincoln, and he had no impression. Anyway. I have to talk about my mother at every chance. And I wrote a whole book in her voice. Anyway, I'm sorry, Lynn Fisher.
Whitman, when he died.
Whitman was, let's see, he was born in 2019, 1919, 1819, 17, he was born in 1819 and he died in 1889, so he was probably 7. He was 70, 73, maybe. Maybe it was a little, I can't remember when people die.
70s.
I can't remember. Anybody know the dates? Any of you Whitman scholars here?
Look at your cell phone, it'll tell you.
That's right. That's right. All right. Yes.
What you do remember is the sequence of the catalog items. When you recite, what technique did you employ in order to?
All right. I'll give you a little lesson. Okay. The pure contralto sings in the organ loft. Okay. That's pure contralto sings in the organ loft. There's a hard C sound, contralto, in that line. Next line has nothing to do with the pure contralto singing in the organ loft at all. But there's a hard C at the beginning of that line. The carpenter dresses his plank. Okay, so like rhyme is a mnemonic, right? Rhyme is a device that poets use to enable people to remember their lines. So the repetition of things actually helps keep the memory. So then sometimes I'll do an image. So then the next line is, so that line, the carpenter dresses his plank, the tongue of his foreplane whistles its wild ascending lisp. Okay, lisp. Next line begins with the married and unmarried children. So L to M, L to M. I mean, it's a complicated. Sometimes it's pictures. Sometimes I do pictures and images, like And there is a technique called the memory palace. Yes. And they say the more obscene images you create, the better you will remember. So I have a few of those, but I won't share this because LexMedia is family television.
Are there any more questions?
Any more questions? We can wrap this up at 8 o'clock and make it an hour show for LexMedia. Of course, you may want to edit the hell out of it. I don't know. All right, well, listen, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to Krista and to Christine for organizing this, and to Julie for taping it, and I hope some of you sign up for the Walt Whitman class. I hope I haven't driven you away with my ridiculousness.
And let's give one more thank you to Tom.
By the way, I just wanted to let you know, my students, I sometimes bring this flask in lieu of plastic bottles. It's just got water in it, but my students one day were like, oh my God, he's drinking. I don't drink, it's just water. You can check if you want. Thank you all.